Warning. This show contains adult political themes and language. Liberals and little children should cover their ears.
Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps, where negativity never sounded so good. Now here's your host, Thomas Purcell.
Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps. I'm your host, Tom Purcell. If you'd like to reach me during the show, you can tweet me at LotusTom, email me at tom@libertyneversleeps.com, or join me on Facebook at Liberty Never Sleeps on Facebook.com. Last night, I tested the iPad and the live function. It kind of works okay, but I'm not really sure how I can set it up. But I'm going to probably do it next Friday. I didn't have the time to really play with it and fine tune it. So you might see like live pop up during the day today a couple times on the Facebook as a test, just to see how it works. I wasn't real satisfied with the results when I tested it through another platform, but we'll see. A Facebook camera, an iPad camera isn't really good on the older ones, which is what I have, a 3-year-old one. I think it's 3 years, 4 years old. I know the new ones are a little higher resolution, and it doesn't allow me to do a live show with the, webcam. So if it did, it would make it a lot easier, but I can't. So that's why we haven't done a live show today. We're just doing the regular mini show. This is the last mini show, folks. This month we didn't get to $50 in contributions for the month. Now, it does say like 51 for the month, but there was a $5 contribution by a family member, so I'm not going to include that. That doesn't count. Somebody added an additional $5 because they wanted to see me work or something like that. So I said, nope, sorry, family. It's my show, my rules. Family contributions don't count. So if we could get it to 56, I'll do mini shows for next month. And then if you are a family member, I'll know. So don't, because I see the emails of people who come in. 75, and I do a full 1-hour show on Fridays because you paid for it. We were going to talk about Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears, and I probably will talk about that next week because it's relevant to what's going on with our $20 bill and Harriet Tubman. That's not to say Harriet Tubman doesn't have a place on our currency. I think Harriet Tubman did a lot of stuff that is of value and is important to the founding of this nation. I just don't think we should displace Andrew Jackson. I think we should put her on another bill. Or I have another suggestion. How about we create a currency with more than one person on it? I noticed that a number of international currencies, and I checked into this, don't necessarily have one person right in the center. We could have a person on either end. And if you're going to put Jackson, if you could take Jack, why don't you leave Jackson on there? And why don't you put a Cherokee leader, maybe Sitting Bull, I don't know who the Indian leader, Sitting Bull or whatever, on the other half. That would be kind of cool. We have the Indian Buffalo Head, Nichols. Maybe we could have an Indian or Native American and Andrew Jackson right there on the bill. And let's take Harriet Tubman, put her on the left, and put Abraham Lincoln on the right, on the 5. It's kind of like, you see all the people that are relative to that story and that part of the national history. What's wrong with that? And then everybody's satisfied. Nobody gets knocked off, and nobody gets a place that doesn't belong to have a place. I think that's a good idea. You could even have Benedict Arnold and George Washington during the Revolutionary War. I don't know. What the hell? Have some, have like both sides of the argument. How about, you have General Lee and Ulysses Grant on the 50. What's wrong with that? General Lee went to West Point. He's a big hero of the early American Empire, right? Why can't you show him? Benedict Arnold was before he became a traitor, so why not have him, right? Why not have different sides of the story? Why not have Robert E. Lee and General Grant? That would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? I would think. You could satisfy. I mean, if blacks and Native Americans can have a say, and because it's culturally sensitive, why can't Confederate rednecks have a say and have Robert Lee on there, right? Why not some of the people like Piers Morgan, who may be Tories and still loyal to the English king, have Benedict Arnold on there? What's wrong with that? Why not having that sort of cultural sensitivity put on our currency as well? I think that's a good idea. I think you could have everybody have a say, right? Why don't we put 15 different faces on the bill, right? Everybody gets a say that way. You have all the presidents. You have Alexander Hamilton and you have Aaron Burr on the same bill. I think that's a good idea. Why not? You got Benjamin Franklin on the bill. Who would you put with Benjamin Franklin? You know what you could put? Benjamin Franklin and Lafayette. Or the local doctor that gave him his penicillin shots. You could do that. I don't see why not. Anyway, not to make light of it, to make light of it, yeah, I did. I think it would be a good idea. Well, I don't see why not. You know? I mean, I understand why you can't put Harriet Tubman on the back of a bill. Because it has connotations of back of the bus kind of thing, come in the rear entrance, so you don't, we don't want to do that. Why not have Lincoln and Tubman right side by side? And in the center, what's in back of the $5 bill currently. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that would be wonderful, actually. I think that would be a better way of honoring the people that have been part of the founding of this nation. And that's all seriousness. I mean, if you're going to piss away money, why anger a certain element of society who were in love with Abraham Lincoln or Andrew Jackson or whoever, right? I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that's a good solution. I liked Greta Van Sustren's solution. Why not put them on the $25 bill? Let's make that, or a $10, a $15 bill, or whatever. Okay. I don't like the idea of spending money right now. That's all. I mean, $19 trillion in debt. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today, and I think this is necessary. The reason why I'm bumping off the Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears story is because I'm seeing a lot of things in social media about LGBT rights, okay? I want to go on the record of saying that I support the right of homosexuals to marry and whatnot. I think that people should be allowed equal rights. I think that people have an ability and a desire to do this, and I don't see any reason why the state should stand in their way. And the reason I say that first is because what I'm going to say next. There is no constitutional establishment for LGBT rights. Okay? There's no such thing. You've made it up. A gay or a lesbian or transgendered person does not have rights that are specific to being lesbian, gay, or transgendered in our society. There is no constitutional definition for it. That's not to say that you can't set up individual states for doing what they want. It's just that there's no federal constitutional standard, and that's important. And here's why. Our rights come from man, nature, God, whatever. We assume that they don't come from government. They are inherent in being a human being. Okay, that's fair. But those rights have to be enabled by a constitution and constitutional law. That's why we have a constitution. We have rights that are inherent in man, but they have to be enshrined in a constitution for them to be legally viable. For instance, you have the right of free speech. We say that human beings are free to speak their mind, say what they will. But we have to put laws that says Congress can make no law, which takes that away. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why we have a Second Amendment, a Third, a Fourth. These amendments are called the Bill of Rights. I know you probably don't get this lesson anymore in school, kids, but I'm telling you now, this is how it works. Therefore, there are no such thing as LGBT rights. There are no such thing as health care rights, health insurance rights. You don't have a right to health insurance, LGBT law, or anything else that's not in the Constitution. Okay, that's how the law works. That's how our government was set up. However, we do have something called the 10th Amendment, the last one of the original Bill of Rights, which says anything that's not specifically spelled out in this Constitution is reserved for a state to decide. Okay, so they left it open because there were gay people in 1776. There were people having abortions in 1776. All these things existed in 1776 in the founding of the nation. Actually, 1787 for you history buffs. That's the date of the ratification of the Constitution. But that doesn't mean that an individual state, per the 10th Amendment, can say what goes on in their state. For instance, take the North Carolina law, which says that a person has to be a certain gender, the gender of birth, in order to use a restroom in that state. That's North Carolina's right. Okay? That's the law. It's per the 10th Amendment. The people of North Carolina can decide how they want to live. You can't say that that's unconstitutional when there are no constitutional established rights for LGBT people. This is why we had to have a 13th Amendment, and this is why we have rights and established rights in the Constitution for women and minorities, right? We have an amendment process. In other words, when blacks during the Civil War were freed and the Emancipation Proclamation was stated by Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't legal. The Emancipation Proclamation is just a statement. It's not a law. It was a proclamation which said that slaves were no longer slaves if they made it across the line. That's essentially the bottom line. I mean, I can go into the specifics of it, but we don't need to do that. Not for this discussion today. But when the war was over, we had a convention, a national convention, to decide once and for all the issue of slavery. And therefore, we had to amend our Constitution as per the rules spelled out in the Constitution. I believe it's 3/4 of the states. Their state legislatures meet and say, yes, black people have a right to exist free in this United States, and they're equal to a white man. That's the amendment process. We amended the process and amended our Constitution several times, such as women's suffrage, the right of women to vote, the equality of minorities and gender in the United States. Sexual, not gender by definition. We established that women have a right to vote. Women are equal to men. We amended our Constitution. Therefore, that right exists now. We've enabled laws, of course, to facilitate that right. For instance, despite what Hillary Clinton says, we have laws denoting equal pay. You can no longer in this country for the last 50 years pay a man more than a woman based on sex. You can't do it. It's illegal. The narrative that's coming out of the DNC in this election, that we need equal pay for women and men, is a bunch of nonsense. We have equal pay laws. If there's any disparity in pay, it's because of social or functional reasons. In other words, women take jobs that are lower paying or accept situations which are different pay. That's all. There are a lot more women that are nurses than are men. There are a lot more men that are doctors. Therefore, the disparity in the healthcare field is a matter of how people are hired. You don't pay a nurse who's a male or a female, let's say working at your local hospital, different rates of pay. It's illegal. These are called equal pay laws. We've been established since, I think, 1963 equal pay laws. It's illegal. The Lilly Ledbetter violated that law, that case, because she brought her case some 30 or 40 years after the discrimination happened, which she says happened. The Supreme Court says, well, wait a minute, the equal pay laws don't have that constitutionality enabled in them. There's a statute of limitations. You have to press your case. I think it's in 10 years. So she would, and Barack Obama waived it with the wand, magic wand that he has called the pen and the executive orders. He did so illegally. So when LGBT people says we have the right to go into a bathroom based on whatever clothing we wear or whatever's in our head, they don't know what they're talking about. There's no such thing. If LGBT people want to have rights or have the law protect them equally because they are lesbian or because they are gay or because they are transgendered, which is a whole made-up thing, but let's not go there. If you want to have that, then you need to do what's called an amendment and go to an amendment process. That's why they have for years trying to get past an ERA amendment, Equal Rights Amendment. Because most legislatures have said, well, that's not necessary because we can do it under the 10th Amendment. And that's what most states have done. That's why they haven't been able to get it passed. But you have to amend it to establish that law, to establish that right. Rights have to be enshrined in our Constitution under an amendment process. There is no exception to that. Now, people say they have a right to an abortion. No, you don't. What you have are legal laws which shield you. The case that appeared before the Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade, has been argued for the constitutionality of it several times. Because the court decided that women could have one legally available, but they don't have a right to it. There are no rights for abortion, just like you don't have a right to health care. I know this is going to come as a shock to the left wing, but there are no rights to have health care in these United States. There is no amendment which guarantees the right to health care. Now, we've done so with laws. The Obamacare law and also the laws passed by George Bush, by the way, which established state exchanges, health insurance pools, and other functional ways, which we've established ways that poor people and sick people and disabled people can receive care at free cost or no cost to them, at cost to society. But you don't have a right to health care. Understand what's involved with that. If you have a right to health care, that means you can walk into any hospital and they can't deny you care no matter what you can't or can pay. Now, we have that based on several rules. Obamacare doesn't guarantee that, folks, by the way. We have something which enables you to buy insurance, but it doesn't guarantee health care. Understand that if you pass a right, if you amend the Constitution to a right to health care, and you walk into a hospital and you demand health care and right, you're enslaving doctors and nurses. That's why it will never hold up. And people say, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, this means that that health care provider, that doctor, that nurse, that surgeon, or whatever, is required by law, by constitutional right, to provide you labor, their labor, to save your life. Now, we have laws saying that a hospital can't refuse service, but they have a right to claim money in the form of now health insurance under Obamacare, but they would just bill you before. If you walked into a hospital and you didn't have health insurance and you didn't have any way to pay, that didn't matter. You weren't turned away. You were just sent a bill. And say, well, look, we'll make arrangements. We're not going to let you die on the floor. That didn't happen. Despite what Donald Trump says, we don't have a system where people are dying in the street, despite what you've been told. But you don't have a right to it. Do you understand what I'm saying here? If you want that right, if you want LGBT people to have the right to go into a bathroom of the opposite sex, or whatever sex you determine, then you have to pass a law. And some states have done that. Some states have passed a law. We have said that you can't discriminate based on LGBT status. We have said, for instance, Target, which owns the bathrooms in their stores, has said, well, if no matter what sex you are, you can use any bathroom. Basically, we don't have gender-specific bathrooms. They have that ability to do under the law. But you don't have a right to demand it. If you want that, if you want the right in all 50 states, then you need to amend our Constitution. Them's the rules, folks. And you know why the left wing doesn't do that? Because they know that the amendment process is very difficult. It's supposed to be. You have to basically get everybody to agree to something before you establish it as a right. That's important. And if everybody doesn't agree, if there's a fair percentage of people that don't agree, then it doesn't happen. And they know that the majority of Americans don't agree with that agenda. The majority of Americans don't agree that LGBT people can walk into any bathroom they want. They basically don't. The vast majority of people, transgendered people, are less than 3% of the population. I think it's less than 1% actually. Well, and that's the case, then you don't have the ability to establish it as a right. Not unless you want to try and do it. If you want to try and convince people that you have that right, well, that's fair. We have a process for that. 3/4 of the state's legislature need to agree to that. But North Carolina isn't, obviously. And people say, well, we've been unfairly. That's not fair. That 6 legislatures guys got together and decided that. Yes, it's absolutely fair. That's what we have as a representative government. If you don't like the laws in North Carolina, well, then I would suggest that you run for office or start a recall process or start a blog or an article and convince people of your argument. But to sit there and scream and say I have a right, you're dead wrong. Okay? And this is coming from somebody that basically says you have a right to a gay marriage. And here's why, by the way. There's no constitutional standard. Constitution works both ways. It's a double-edged sword. There's nothing in the Constitution which says that a marriage has to be between a man and a woman. Nothing. And it says right there in the Constitution that anything that's not spelled out in it is up to the individual states. So the individual states can decide whether or not gay marriage. The problem is we have an activist court. And the court now has said, well, this is a right based on a legal decision. So we have to live with it right now until someone challenges that. The individual states have the ability to do this, to determine the legislation in the state. This is why Texas can pass laws which make having an abortion in that state very difficult and expensive. They have a right to regulate their state and commerce, okay? Unless you want to pass an amendment saying you have a right to an abortion, that's going to happen. It works both ways. That's why the DOMA Act, the Defense of Marriage Act, was unconstitutional. Because there was nothing in the Constitution which said you have a man and a woman and that's the only way you can marry. This is why I went to war with the conservatives last year on the issue. I said, well, wait a minute, they're going to strike down DOMA as unconstitutional. And everyone looked at me like, what are you talking about, Tom? You're a Republican, you're a conservative, you're supposed to believe in this. I go, it doesn't matter what I believe. It's what the law says. This is the important thing and the important message I'm trying to convey to you today. That if you're a conservative, if you're a constitutional conservative, which people say they are, you have to stand by what the Constitution says. This is a concept called originalism. It's something that Anton Scalia believed wholeheartedly in. The Constitution is a law. It's a legal document, and it needs to be upheld and interpreted exactly what it says. The Constitution says you have a right to keep and bear arms. Period. End of story. It doesn't say you have a right to a musket. It doesn't say you can't have an automatic weapon. Automatic weapons, by the way, are legal. You just have to get a permit. They just make it difficult for you. But you can get one. You can even get a tank or a cannon. A lot of people don't know that. You can get it. Just requires a lot of permits, that's all. Long process. It's an expensive process. Okay, that's how they're keeping control on it, because you really don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry running around with a howitzer in their front yard. And the Supreme Court has interpreted the Second Amendment to be relative to personal firearms. That's why most gun control laws, when they're challenged, are shot down. Second Amendment says nothing about handguns, about ammunition clips, nothing. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall be unabridged. Period. End of story. Done. It was deliberately left vague like that. And that's why the 10th Amendment exists. So that anything that they didn't think of or anything that they didn't think was important was left to the amendment process and the individual states. We have to get away from this idea that the federal government determines everything that goes on in this country. The states control the majority of what we do and say and live with every day. The government, the federal government, is supposed to be a minimalist government. just to cover the very basic and most important things, like national defense, like the right of free speech, like the right of equality based on skin color or gender, as in the case of women. It has nothing to do with LGBT rights. You got to amend the Constitution, pal. Some people have messaged me, don't talk about this, because then they'll do it. Listen, if they could get 3/4 of the state's legislatures to say that a lesbian or a gay person has specific rights to them because they're lesbian, all the more power to them, okay? And you know what? If they're capable of amending the Constitution and getting that many people to agree to it, I'll defend their right as much as anyone's. That's the way the Constitution works, and that's the way true conservatism works, folks. That's all I've got to say today. Take care. Have a good one. I'll be back Monday. And we're going to be here every day. We're going to be on YouTube. We're on iHeartRadio. That's where most people listen to us. You can subscribe to our show. You can get them to your email inbox directly as soon as I upload them on Spreaker.com, on YouTube.com. And if you could support the show in any way possible, I'd appreciate it, because this is a listener-based show. Take care, folks. Have a good one. Have a good Friday, and have a good weekend.